Transferring wealth successfully starts with asking yourself questions that will give your family a better life now and for generations to come. In this podcast, financial professionals John and Michael from Copper Beech Financial Group guide you through eye-opening questions to help you discover the truth about your wealth. Now, on to the show.
Hello and welcome to The Truth About Wealth with John and Michael Parise of Copper Beech Financial Group. I'm really excited because today they have brought a return guest to the show, and that's Tim O'Rourke. Gentlemen, how are you this morning?
Doing well. How are you, Eric?
Oh,
doing great, Eric.
Yeah, this is going to be fun. I mean, we had a lot of fun the last time on the last podcast. So obviously we're talking wine. There must be a lot to talk about because you brought him back, John.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. If you listen to the last podcast, it really focused on wine being an asset class potentially as an investment strategy, but also understanding wine in general, how it's produced and how it grows, and everybody different regions have different effect on wine quality and texture and taste. So today I thought we would do something a little bit more laid back and fun, and talk about regions. I always get people ask me about what's my favorite wine, and if you live in the United States, it's usually I love Napa wine, which is typical, and Napa wine is very good wine. But when I met Tim, if you remember the last podcast, he educated me on the wines around the world, and particularly France and Italy, which some of the oldest wine in the world was made there, and the classic structure of wine is phenomenal in those regions, in France particularly. So I'm gonna let Tim kind of flow today with understanding the regions of France and why certain regions are better than others. Not better, but have different wine in general. And I'll let Tim roll with it. So Tim, let's have a little fun today.
All right. Sounds great, John. Hey, thanks for having me again. It's interesting, too, that the wine regions of the world, there's so many when we think about it, and a lot of us focus, I started drinking wine out of the Napa area, and I actually started drinking white wines, and how it evolves, what you become comfortable with, and then all of a sudden it expands, and next thing you know, you're trying wines from Argentina, from South America, from different parts of Australia, and then, of course, the primary wine regions in the world are Italy, France, Spain, and then the U.S., and the U.S. is like half of the production of what Italy does. Italy's the biggest wine producing region. So as we dive into this, I think we'll bring some clarity to how to collect, how to potentially just, maybe if you have a hobby, even just drink wine and have fun with it.
Yeah, it's a good hobby for us, right? We like drinking wine all the time.
Yeah, very productive hobby.
Well, it's a liquid investment,
Right.
Exactly. It doesn't last long.
But let's start in France today, just because the history of France is interesting. Cabernet Sauvignon is the most popular grape in the world. Would everybody agree with that? I think. And
yeah, I agree.
Yep.
And so where it really began was in France, and I did a little research on this because I always found it fascinating too, that the history of the Cabernet Sauvignon grape was an accident. Actually, it was bred as a combination of the Cabernet Franc grape, which was just growing wild basically, and the Sauvignon Blanc grape. Somehow they got accidentally bred together by grafting, and that created the Cabernet Sauvignon Blanc grape. That's where it actually came from. And then from there, from France, it got distributed throughout the world. And kind of the history of it is fascinating too, when you get into the different wine regions of everybody seems to grow the Cabernet Sauvignon grape. Anywhere you go in the world, you could pretty much have a cab glass of wine from that region. And even when I'm from Missouri originally, and they got Missouri wines that actually use Cabernet Sauvignon. They're grown throughout the United States and all the major wine regions, and particularly in Bordeaux, which is the one I'll talk about first because that's kind of where it all originated. There's 5 particular grape varietals in Bordeaux that everybody would probably be familiar with, which is the Cabernet Sauvignon, of course, Merlot, Cab Franc, Petit Verdot, and Malbec. And Bordeaux is known as a blending region. So they take those grapes in different percentages and create a wine. So if you're on the what they call the left bank, which is left of the river that flows kind of through Bordeaux, it's the Gironde River. It's the left bank is primarily Cabernet Sauvignon based wines, and then they're broken down into little subclassifications of vineyards and appellations. And then on the right side, it's primarily Cab Franc and Merlot. So that's the basis of the majority of the blend in those wines. And so you have two different styles all in one region. And then you have the Sauternes, which are the sweet dessert wines. I think, John, we've shared a couple.
Yes.
Over the years, we've had some of these, what we would call sweet dessert wines.
Yeah, very sweet, and you have to have them with dessert.
Right, and that's the region that a lot of that began. But I'll touch on that in a minute. But anyway, Bordeaux is really this area that has grown in popularity, I think, over the years. And people feel a little bit more comfortable, I think, in the United States at drinking Bordeaux wines because they know the five grapes all are blended there. And I think you see that in California, too.
All right, so what you're telling us is that the producers that grow wine in those regions can mix and match these grape varietals and make their specialty wine in that particular producer. Is that how they do that? I mean, is there a model they follow, or they just say, okay, I'm going to add more Cab Franc this year versus Petit? I mean, is that how they think about producing wine?
Yeah, pretty much. It's a freelance up to the winemaker, and a lot of times, most of the places they identify separately. So when they grow, let's say they have three different grapes blended in, they pick the Cab, they pick the Merlot, they pick the Malbec, and then they blend the three after they make the wine. So they separate them and bring them together for a bottling, and then they store them obviously in these oak barrels, as you know, to get some aging process and also to impart some wood flavor into the wine. So it's all really up to the winemaker, John. I think how they want to make wine differently.
Yeah, France is kind of interesting, Tim. When you and I talk about that region, I find that the wine is, I don't know if it's higher quality. I'm assuming it is from your standpoint, but it seems like the prices of French wine is really sometimes off the charts. Is there a particular reason for that in France? Is that just because of the quality of the grape? Walk us through why certain wines like Montrachet, which is one of my favorite white Burgundies. I mean, you can spend $3,000 a bottle on that stuff. I mean, and not everyone can afford to buy it, but it seems to be very pricey wine. Can you walk us through why it's that way in France?
Well, it's popularity. I mean, they have limited amount of production, and when you start getting other regions, other countries and nationalities starting to buy these wines who have a lot of spendable capital, they're going to buy up, a whole area. Like Burgundy is an example. You mentioned $3,000 a bottle for a bottle of white wine. I mean, that's kind of crazy, but when you think about the small production of a Petard Montrachet, which is a subregion in that particular appellation, when you think about Petard Montrachet, or even what they call Montrachet, which is the actual hub of that whole kind of white growing area, there's really only 3,000 or 4,000 cases of wine made in some of these small areas for the entire world. So what they're going to do is bid up the price, and that's kind of why it's gone crazy in Burgundy and Bordeaux.
Yeah, but it's really good, Tim. You and I have had some good Montrachet, and although not a $3,000 bottle of wine, you don't let me drink at that level. But we've had some good quality Montrachet at between $60 and $100 a bottle, which is still very, very pricey. But it's really off the charts quality wine. I mean, it's absolutely
and it's
delicious.
So different.
You have
John,
to try it.
It's so different from Chardonnay out of, let's say, California or Oregon even. It's amazing wine. And I think a lot of this is the subclimates, the microclimates, the soil. And also when you think about a wine region like Burgundy, they've been making wine for over 1,200 years. They get to know their land pretty well. they get to know the climate and when to pick the grapes, and so that kind of education is passed down from father to children to children to children to grandchildren to great grandchildren. So many generations. When you guys think about your business in a multi-generational kind of capacity, these people in wine countries like this really blow your mind when you think about how they pass this along through generations, and the same family owns it for 1,000 years or something. It's crazy.
Now, Tim, I always found that interesting. Is that typical? Is that sort of the rule in that region versus the exception? How often do these this land change hands as time goes on? Do you know?
Yeah, every generation, Michael, you pretty much see it happen. Where, especially in Burgundy, I think what's happened is it's compressed. So somebody started out with maybe 50 hectares. A hectare is 2.2 acres. So they started with 50 hectares, and all of a sudden, they've got 4 or 5 kids, let's say. So each kid got 10 hectares. And then each of those kids had 2 kids each. So each of them got 5, and then 2.5. And next thing you know, 1,000 years later, you got people that got 2 rows in a vineyard. And that's where they make their 1 barrel of wine. Just kind of mind-boggling. But the other fascinating part I like about France is in the 1800s they recognized, actually in Burgundy, it went back to the Middle Ages pretty much. There were monks there. The Benedictine monks realized that depending on the climate, the soil, the vineyard elevation, the sun exposure, kind of, John, what we saw in Italy on our trip, it has a huge effect on the wines and how it influences the taste. And so what they do is they've classified the land. So they'll say this plot of land is Grand Cru. Well, that represents a little over 1% of all the wine grown in that region. And then Premier Cru, is the next level down, and then village wines and what Burgundy, they have Bourgogne. So they have 4 different levels in which they classify the land itself. And so that land is very protected almost, for growing for the Chardonnay grapes or the Pinot Noir. Those are the 2 grapes in Burgundy.
Yeah, I mean, when you look about the region, all the regions in France, we drink a lot of Chateau de Neuf de Pape. We try some Rhone wines. You want to walk the audience through those regions as well? Sure.
So Chateau Neuf de Pape is a really historical area that was developed during the Roman times, and so the varietals there, I think there's 17 different varietals that can be blended into Chateau Neuf de Pape. It's in the Rhone region. It's what they call Southern Rhone. So there's kind of a line, kind of like the North and the South in the United States, In Rhone, it's divided between Northern Rhone and Southern Rhone. Northern Rhone is primarily Syrah, and Southern Rhone is a blend of all these different varietals, of which Syrah is one, but Grenache is the primary. Kind of like back to Bordeaux when you had the left bank is Cabernet Sauvignon based and Merlot, and then the right bank is Cab Franc and Merlot based. So in northern Rhone, it's going to be primarily Syrah, and so all the grapes there are focused on that region, that climate, and it's completely different from Southern Rhone. It's more of a drier climate, and it dates back over 1,000 years, where the Pope actually had a place there. It was kind of like a summer home, and that was where the name came out, Chateau Neuf de Pape, the new house of the Pope, and they started making these wines really just for the clergy. And then all of a sudden, everybody else started like, wow, this is pretty good stuff. I think I want some of this. And so they expanded over the years, and then they classified their vineyards into appellations now, and that's kind of how it's expanded. And so when you really get into the minutia of these regions like Rhone, you'll learn that there's certain areas that do better because of the microclimate and also the soil of growing these kind of grapes, and they make
So if you weren't
unbelievable
familiar
hardy
with French
wines.
wines, Tim, how would you recommend a wine from that region for someone to try? What would be your first choice, maybe second choice, so they can get a feel on the flavor of wines in that region if they're not familiar with it?
Well, it's Michael. I'm going to pick on you a little bit here, but it's like you. Michael likes wines from Italy that are kind of Sangiovese based grapes. So that's Brunellos, and for somebody getting into wine, I would say that a good place to start that is reasonable would be Rhone wines, and I would go to the Châteauneuf-du-Pape region that we're talking about because they're
That's really
very
good.
expressive. They're big, and yet they're complicated. When you get a mouthful of this with some food, with a hearty meat or something, or you can drink it pretty much with anything, even with cheese and crackers. It goes pretty good. But I would do a Southern Rhone, a Châteauneuf-du-Pape, and there's different little subregions depending on the kind of money you want to spend, but they're very reasonably priced. No one's really gone crazy, and I don't think that whole area has really taken off like Bordeaux and Burgundy has. To drink a what they call a first growth Bordeaux, you're going to spend coming out of the chute on a new production, which you can't even drink yet because I think it needs time to age to really get its full expression. You're going to spend $800, and in Rhone on a new release, usually 5 years old, 4 years old, you're going to spend about $50, $60 at the most.
That's a big difference. Yeah.
Yeah, so I would go to Rhone wines. I think though easier to understand, and I think they go with a lot of different foods.
Well, let's talk about the Champagne region because I know everybody always gets confused about sparkling wines and champagnes, and talk about the Champagne from that region if you get a second.
Yeah. So Champagne really came out of this whole. It's evolved really because the wines there. It's a colder climate in France, and so this goes back to Roman times. But they started trying to produce wines up there, and it just never took because they never got the ripeness out of the grape, and so they happened across not to, in the winemaking process you got to stop the yeast from growing, which creates the alcohol, and also it causes the bubbles of the fermentation process. And so the early producers accidentally started making a sparkling wine, and the famous monk, the Dom Perignon one that everybody's probably familiar with. Yeah. They developed this technique, and all of a sudden they found out that people really liked the sparkling wines, and it kind of took off after that. And
especially
and
the Dom.
Well, the
awesome.
2002 isn't too bad either.
Yeah, we had that a couple of months ago. It was off the charts. Very good.
Yeah, really crazy. But it's a fun region to visit if somebody has the time and the inclination to go over there. I think everybody's probably heard of Veuve Clicquot, and there's some really Bollinger and
Krug.
Krug, of course. There's a lot of history in that area, and to go in the caves and get down underneath the earth, because that's how they stored wine years ago, is they built these caves 20, 30 feet underground so that they could keep the ambient temperature consistent right around 55 degrees. And they found that to be the best way to make wine, keep it, store it, and last throughout the years.
Yeah, remember we were in Italy, went to Contrano winery, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, they had 1 million bottles of white sparkling wines in those cellars. I mean, it was amazing how many bottles of wine down there, and it's pretty good sparkling wine from Italy. But it was fascinating to see how they turn it. That there's a champagne turner where he's hired just to turn the wines to keep them moving and shaking and growing.
Do you remember the
down in
name
that
of the
basement.
guy? What did they call him?
Oh, I couldn't name it, but he was he was a funny guy. He kept
They
smiling.
call him the Riddler.
The Riddler.
It's called riddling.
Yeah.
That's where the Batman thing came from, I think, sometimes. But they come in every day. They used to hand turn a quarter turn. Now they have some modern techniques of turning champagne bottles, but that's the old traditional way. it's fascinating to watch them do this too. You know, like when we were underneath there at Contrada, the guy did a demonstration how quick he moved through a whole rack. You know, the riddling rack, how they had the V thing set up.
It's fascinating, but you have to see it to believe it that these wineries have storage capacity that's unbelievable, especially in these top regions.
Well, just in Champagne alone, get a hold of this number. They produce 200 million bottles of champagne.
Sheesh.
Wow. Jeez.
But you can't call it champagne unless it's from the Champagne region. It has to be called sparkling wine, correct? In every other region? Okay.
Yeah, a lot of, 40, 50 years ago, everybody tried to put out in all parts of the world, a wine they called champagne, but there were a lot of lawsuits over it, and they finally claimed the brand and ability just to keep it to champagne. So if you see champagne on a label now, you're pretty much guaranteed it's going to be from that wine region.
And they also blend champagne, am I correct? I mean, it's a Chardonnay grape, but they also have Pinot Noir blends. You want to walk a little bit through that, why certain producers do that? Is that because it's from a producer that chooses to mix different grapes, or is it a standard procedure over there?
No, they have a choice, just like in Bordeaux or even in California, how they can make blended wines. They make blended champagne. So the Pinot Noir grape, which is one of the primary ones there, and obviously the Chardonnay, and then Pinot Meunier. Those are the three primary grapes there, and they use the Pinot Noir sometimes in a higher quantity to make what I would call kind of a pinkish color or a rosé. And the longer you keep those skins in the fermentation process, the more color it imparts into the champagne. But those are the three grapes, and they blend them basically according to tradition and also according to whatever the winemaker feels is the best blend for that particular year. And just like wines in other regions, champagnes are only vintage champagnes are only produced in the best years. And if they don't have the best year, a particular winemaker won't make a 2008 or a 2009 or 2010 or whatever year it might be. They might just blend it all into what they call a non-vintage. A non-vintage is typically 3 different vintages blended together to get a consistent flavor. So Veuve Clicquot does this a lot. When you buy a Veuve out of the grocery store or wine shop, what you're buying really is a blended champagne over 3 different years and they're trying to keep the flavor profile the same from non-vintage to non-vintage each year release. So it's really another kind of level of wine. But if you get into what they call the blanc de blancs, that means the white of whites. That's 100% Chardonnay champagne, and that has a completely different profile, flavor to it too. And so you've got a wide range of different types of champagne you can drink with different blended grapes.
And there's a lot of sweeter champagnes as well versus the dry. I prefer the dry, and I prefer the blend. That's my flavor. That's my palate.
I like the Blanc de Blancs too. I think some of them are.
Yeah, I know you've
awesome.
had battles about that.
Hey, Tim, can I go back to something you said a little earlier, kind of a rookie question here, if you'll bear with me. But you mentioned turning the wine bottles, and I think, if I'm correct, that most of the time that's more important to do with the sparkling wines. Am I correct in that? And if so, why not for other types of wines? Do you not need to turn the bottle?
Yeah, Michael, that's a good question. So what they do is they actually put remember the soda pop caps that they put on sodas in the United States? They do the same thing.
That's before my time, Tim.
It's kind of like before the cell phone. So what they do is they put a bottle cap on the top of these champagne bottles, and they don't put a cork in. They put a bottle cap, and they turn the wine so that the cap is on a 45-degree angle down, and the bottom of the wine bottle is up. And so they rotate these every day a quarter of a turn, because the yeast and the sediment inside the champagne They want to move it around and slowly get it down out of liquid form into sediment until it gets in the neck of the bottle. And so they only do this with champagne because they want that exposure and that sediment to drop, and then turning it moves it around slowly over about a month to 2 months, and they get it into the neck. And then when they get it out, they actually chill the neck and take the cork off, and the sediment all comes out. And then you pretty much got what they call a clarified champagne bottle ready to go. And then they put their cork in. The cork they use is pretty similar from the cork tree. And as you know, it blossoms up on the top. That's basically because of the pressure. And they put those caps on there with a tie for security, because those things can be dangerous if you're not careful. Anytime you open a bottle, just for disclosure, never pointed it at anybody. I've seen a couple go off and almost took a person's head off.
Yeah. Yeah, that's important. So it's only for the champagne, or sparkling wine where that's
Correct.
needed. So if people out there turning their, Cabernet Sauvignon bottles, not necessary in your opinion?
No, I don't think you need to. I think you can just let that set. It doesn't hurt. You can move them around every now and then if you feel like it's going to make a difference. But the main thing in collecting wine, I think, is keeping the temperature consistent, whether you're at 55, 60, 65, 70 degrees. I wouldn't go over 70 if you can, but you don't need to really turn it. You just need to keep the temperature consistent and keep natural light out of any of your storage units. You don't want sunlight going in. It does, the UV can actually harm the grapes, because it is a living organism inside those bottles.
Ted, before we end, is there any other wine from France that we need to just mention that could be a choice for someone to try?
Yeah, there's some wines out of the Loire Valley in Provence that I think are worthy of looking into. I think there's a lot of wines that are made in France that you can try, and very reasonably priced too, John. Provence wines can be under $20, and the Loire Valley, the same thing. And they're different grape varietals grown there, so there's a lot of Rhone kind of varietals that are popular there. Grenache Blanc, Marsanne, Viognier. I think a lot of people may have heard of a Viognier instead of a Chardonnay, or Sauv Blanc is grown there, a Semillon. Those kind of grapes. I think Provence is a great region to go and visit if you're going to make a trip over to France and want to hang out and get outside of Paris and see some of the countryside. I think that's a great choice. If you drive all the way over to Bordeaux, that's kind of that's a long haul to get to. It's not easy to, where I think from Paris you can get into Burgundy and Provence and Loire Valley, and you can travel to some of these regions pretty typically in a shorter period of time and really taste some great wines. And what I also find great about France is the food there is absolutely incredible with the wine, and the food changes to the wine region. So the food is kind of adapted to the wines, which we saw in Italy too. That same thing is northern Italy compared to southern Italy. If you're in Sicily, the food style is completely different from northern Italy. And the same thing in France. I think you're going to see a wide variance of different types of restaurants and heavier sauces, lighter sauces, depending on the wine region that you're in.
All right, Tim, we're going to cut this a little short today. I mean, thanks for your time. I think it's fascinating when you think about wine from these regions. I know you and I enjoyed a bunch of this wine. I think for people listening to this podcast, you do yourself a favor, try some different wines from different regions, and you'll fall in love with some of them. I mean, I love the Medoc, I love the Montrachet, and the Chateau de Neuf, the Pop. I mean, those are my favorite wines from that region, and I enjoy them all the time. Tim, I wanted to thank you for your time today. In the next podcast, we're going to focus on Italian wines. I think thinking about regions and talking about certain regions will educate people that are listening that it might motivate them to try wines only because of the mystery behind them, I guess, for lack of better terms. But I wanted to thank you, Tim, for your time today, and it's always a pleasure. And I guess I'll see you next time, and make sure you bring some good wine next time you stop by.
All right. Deal, man. Thanks so much. Enjoyed it.
Thanks.
Take care, guys.
All right, this has been fantastic. And after we're done recording today, Tim, if you could just kind of remind John, I remember last time we got together, you told John there was a certain wine he should send me, and I think we all forgot about that. Just saying. Anyway,
I did. I forgot. Shame on me. It's COVID. It's
COVID. Blame COVID. Again, great information.
Eric's been very quiet the last half hour or so. He's been looking back and listening to his old podcast, trying to remember if we owed him any wine.
That's right. I've got my list. All right. Thank you guys so much. This has been fantastic. And of course, the last thank you always goes to you, listening audience. Thank you for tuning in and listening to the Truth About Wealth podcast with John and Michael Parise. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when John and Michael come out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. This makes it much easier to share these podcasts with your friends and family. Again, thanks so much for listening today. For everyone at Copper Beech Financial Group, this is Eric Johnson reminding you to live your best day every day. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Truth About Wealth podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Copper Beech Financial Group. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.
This material is for informational purposes only. Neither APFS nor its representatives provide tax, legal, or accounting advice. Please consult your own tax, legal, or accounting professional before making any decisions. Copper Beech is not affiliated with American Portfolios Financial Services, Inc. and American Portfolios Advisors, Inc. Securities offered through American Portfolio Financial Services, Inc., a member of FINRA SIPC, investment advisory and financial planning services offered through American Portfolio Advisors, Inc., an SEC-registered investment advisor. These opinions are subject to change at any time without notice. Any comments or postings are provided for informational purposes only and do not constitute an offer or a recommendation to buy or sell securities or other financial instruments. Readers should conduct their own review and exercise judgment prior to investing. Investments are not guaranteed, involve risk, and may result in a loss of principal. Past performance does not guarantee future results. Investments are not suitable for all types of investors. Copper Beech is an unaffiliated entity of American Portfolios Financial Services, Inc. and American Portfolios Advisors, Inc. Any opinion expressed in this forum is not the opinions of American Portfolio Financial Services, Inc. and American Portfolio Advisors, Inc., and have not been reviewed by the firm for completeness or accuracy.